Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are continuing our coverage on Dawn of X, and we are covering Fallen Angels. You know, after I covered issue number 1, initially I was on the fence. I was like, I don't know how I feel about issue number 1. But my rule when it comes to comics is read the first story arc. And if after the first story arc, it doesn't really resonate with me, then I'll drop it, right? So I'm like, okay, we got to keep on keeping on. I'm glad I did, because Fallen Angels is awesome. The biggest problem with the first issue is it doesn't explain anything. Things are happening, and that's basically it. This one is awesome. It's like one of the coolest stories from Dawn of X, right? So like the best thing coming out of Marvel right now. So what this does is this jumps back into the past, right? And it basically deals with a guy by the name of Yama who's having a conversation with Quanin. But the idea is that she's having this conversation with this guy, this guy Yama, and he basically says, "I've met you before, the Blade of Nyorin, Matsuo's prize." Now, it's one of the things we talk about in like Psylocke Explained and things like that, is that for the character of Quanin, she spent a lot of her life, or at least what little that we knew, in a very precarious situation. What you had Nyorin, who was a crime lord, I think that's how you pronounce it, who was a crime lord in Japan. And then you had Matsuo, who's the guy that Quanin was in love with, who was basically an assassin for the Hand. And the result of this is that Matsuo and Quanin knew that eventually the Hand and Nyorin would basically end up going to war with each other, right? Because for those of you guys who are unfamiliar, the Hand is a very, very old and ancient organization, and those organizations that come into conflict with the Hand are dealt with harshly and swiftly. The Hand doesn't screw around. And so because Nyorin was doing his whole thing where he was basically encroaching on the territory and the role of the Hand, the two tribes ultimately went to war with each other. And when they did, Matsuo and Quanin were caught in the middle. And so because they were lovers, they were essentially forced to fight each other to the death. Quanin, her allegiance was for the most part explicitly to her warlord. And then Matsuo, of course, was an agent of the Hand. And so as a result of that, during that fight between the two of them, Quanin basically fell off a cliff, and ultimately she was believed to have been dead. And around that exact same time, Betsy Braddock washed up on the shore. And that's when you basically end up getting the body swap between these two characters. This takes place seemingly long before that, or at some point shortly after that. But the long and short of this is that what she basically tells this doctor is like, close your eyes, right? Because what he's trying to do is barter passage and get away. And the funny thing about this is he says, there's nobody keeping me here. I just need to get out of this place and I need to escape. And so she simply says, cover your eyes. And then she kind of goes through this really, really amazing line where she's like, there is no escape for people like us. When we're brought into the clan, we serve the clan. And that's the way it is. We serve until the day we die. And that's exactly what's kind of going on here, is this guy is trying to defect. He's trying to get away. And the result is that he can't, right? Quanin, kind of serving out her role, basically ends up killing this guy. And so you get this really, really amazing moment here. And we're going to kind of jump forward sort of past this for a second, but we get this really amazing moment where we're really in like right now in Japan, she ends up catching up with essentially the wife of this guy. Now, basically she ends up taking out this driver and then, killing the guy, and then basically catches up to this woman and says, look, like, I'm supposed to kill you, right? I killed your husband because that's what I was assigned to do, but I'm going to spare your life. And in reality, this is a big no-no, right? This is a big no-no. When the Hand tasks you with killing someone, you kill someone. The masters are the ones who decide who gets to live and who gets to die. You're basically an object to be used to carry out a particular purpose, right? Under any normal circumstance, this woman and her unborn baby would be gone. They'd be snuffed out, and that would be the end of them. The reason why Quanin doesn't do it is because what she says is like, I reached into the mind of your husband and I realized how much he loved you. And basically when her husband was essentially saying, there's no one keeping me here, there's nothing going on, it wasn't for the sake of abandoning his wife and child, right? That was not really the case. It was to keep them protected, because as an agent of the Hand, if as far as the Hand is concerned, this guy has nothing else keeping him here, they would have no reason to look for a wife and child. But because of the fact that the Hand eventually learned about it, of course, hence the reason why Quanin was sent after this woman, ultimately Quanin was tasked with killing this woman. And so as a result of this, what Quanin basically tells us is that eventually they catch up to her and they kill her. They torture her for information, then they kill her, right? So it's one of these things where like her fate was sealed. The funny thing about this is that Quanin had kind of been keeping tabs on it. She basically experienced this woman's last moments when she was being eliminated, and she never ratted her out. She never ratted out Quanin and said like, that's the woman who basically saved me. That never happened, right? So that's an insane amount of allegiance and a huge amount of loyalty and a massive thank you, for these actions. And so it's a pretty big deal there. But what I want to do here is I want to kind of continue this, and I want to jump directly over to a conversation between Quanin and Laura Kinney with X-23. And this is probably one of the coolest conversations ever, right? Because when it comes to Laura Kinney, as long as she's been in Marvel Comics, right? When Craig Kyle and Chris Yost originally created her in X-Men Evolution, then she was rolled over into the comics with Joe Quesada's really weird NYX story. And then from there, just kind of got rolled over into her own origin and went forward from there. There was a lot of storytelling. I mean, her origin was fleshed out, her role role, how she related to Wolverine, things like that. A lot of that stuff was dealt with. But one of the big things that wasn't really dealt with there is, did she ever really find a way to reconcile her rage, right? The kind of thing she inherited both by virtue of her training as well as just the genealogy of Wolverine, right? You guys know that Wolverine goes into like a berserker rage and all hell breaks loose. The question was, did she ever really find a way to cope with that? And the answer to the question is no. And that's why she's talking and basically working with Quanon here, is because her question is, understanding you the way that I do, the connection that we share here, you have the same kind of rage that I do, but you keep it so under control. The question is, can you teach me to be the same thing? And the response of Quanon is, yes, I can teach you that. I can make you a master of your rage, but understand, every master is a slave. And initially, Lord Kitty doesn't grasp that. The reality of what Quanon is telling her is, yes, I can make you a master of your rage, but at the end of the day, you're still a slave to it. Because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going about every single moment of every single aspect of your life, and you're going to be working to keep it under control, right? The fact that you have this thing out there that you're working to control means that it dominates your life, because if you let it go out of control, who knows what might happen, right? So you're doing what you're doing, not because it's a thing you want to master, but because you're scared of it, because you're scared of what would happen if you didn't master it and the effect that it would have in your life. It's a very profound statement to make, right? It's a very profound case to make. The other cool thing about this is that you basically end up getting Cable talking directly with Quanon herself. Now, again, this is one of the things that we kind of talked about before, that when it came to the older version of Cable, he was considered to be old hat. He was really, really cool when he first popped up. The issue is that over the years in Marvel, he's basically turned into a plot device. Like, there'll be some event that'll take place and the Cable pops up, don't do that, you'll mess up the future, you know, and that's basically how his character ended up evolving over the years. That's basically what he became. If there was something that Marvel wanted to fix or undo, then, you know, suddenly here comes Cable from the future undoing it because it'll mess with the future, you know, and his character really lost his purpose. And so because of that, as part of this great big huge paradigm shift that Marvel's been implementing over the course of the last year or so, maybe the last 2 years, what you ended up getting was the younger version of Cable from the future killing his future version, right? So like Cable 2050 years in the future versus Cable at 3000 years in the future, more or less. It was basically killing off that old version. What you're noticing with this younger version here is he doesn't really manipulate time in the same fashion, right? He's not using time as a scapegoat, as a means to get out of situations and things like that. He's really kind of here and then carrying out his mission accordingly, right? So what knowledge of the future he has is used in his stories, but it's not heavy-handed and it's not a plot device. It's a genius way to use his character. And so as a result of that, what he basically ends up saying is that as far as he's aware, you know, kind of again, using this side plot, this creation of Overclock, that there is a place out there in Brazil that uses slave labor, right? Uses young kids, uses adults, you know, this entire village essentially as a means to kind of continue the creation of this product. And the idea is using Cable's information, we can go out there and we can stop that. Now, here's the big issue that goes on here is Overclock is basically a product being manufactured and being used, or at least being sent out there into the world by Apoth. We don't really know who Apoth is, but one of the points that Quanon makes here is we can't just go out there and save this village. We can't really save them because every time we leave, we risk Krakoa refusing to let us back in. I remember ever since the events of X-Force number 3, when you basically had the quote-unquote death of Xavier, the island has for the most part been on lockdown. And so leaving and coming back and leaving and coming back, at the end of the day, Krakoa doesn't really know what they're doing when they go out there, especially when they're being extremely secretive. And so as far as Krakoa knows, they could have been the ones who set up the whole death of Charles Xavier. Now they weren't, but it could have been that Krakoa was like, well, maybe you did. So like, you can't get back into the island anymore until we get all this in motion. Because of that, it's one of these things where it's like the next time we go out, we have to go out knowing where Apoth is and knowing what he's doing. We can't just go out willy-nilly. And so as a result of that, Cable kind of takes it as an affront. And the reason why this matters is because in this future that Cable was raised up in, he of course knows about the notion of like the survival of the fittest, right? It was a very harsh environment, very difficult for people to grow up in, but he also knows a lot of history there. And he's seen mutants constantly being used for nefarious purposes and falling in line with the charter of Krakoa in saying that we want this island to be a safe haven for people, if only for that purpose, if no other reason than like we have to go out there and help people where we can because Cable's a legitimate good guy. At the end of the day, the response of Quanon is, I'm not going out there and neither are you. And so the response of Cable is, well then fine, I'll go out there on my own, right? I'll go out there on my own and I'll do my own thing. Of course, he ends up taking X-23 with him. And so what you end up getting here is this really cool explanation that takes place between Mr. Sinister and Quanon herself. And what ends up going on here is that Quanon really reveals the nature of like the butterflies, right? For those of you guys who are familiar with Betsy Braddock, you guys know that whenever she used, at least back in the Chris Claremont days, when she used her psychic powers or her telepathic powers, a butterfly would basically appear on her face. And so as a result of that, when Betsy Braddock and Quanon went through their whole thing, Quanon used a butterfly as well. And one of the things that's kind of established here is that she hated that. She hated the idea that it was really kind of a holdover from when she was being controlled, or at least, you know, when she was going through the body swap with Betsy Braddock and herself. And so where she still maintained that at the end of the day, she wanted to kind of create that and make it her own identity, make it into something that was unique and interesting for her, as opposed to kind of like, this is a reminder of when I shared bodies with Betsy Braddock. And so that's what she's really been trying to do in a lot of different ways. Now, it's not a huge plot point, but it is a way to kind of expand on the character of Kwannon and focus on the little elements about her. Because remember, for like 99% of the X-Men readership right now, she's pretty obscure. They don't really know anything about her, right? I mean, some people do, but like you would have had to have been reading Marvel Comics really since like the late 80s and the early 90s to really understand the nature and the notion behind like revenge and like everything that went into her character. And so as a result of that, it's one of these cool things because Sinister's response is, well, okay, if that's the case and you're trying to do your own thing, then sure, like you have my allegiance now. Now understand this, the allegiance and the loyalty of Sinister always comes at a price. He has some kind of plan that he wants to implement, and using Kwannon for his own ends will basically help him achieve that plan. So that's really what's going on with him. The result of this is that ultimately it ends up being Kwannon who's basically trying to reform herself, and not really so much as a hero. And this is kind of a cool thing because what she says is like, Betsy Braddock is a hero, I'm trying to be something else. What I think she's really trying to be is I think she's trying to be a realist, right? Like when it comes to like superheroes in Marvel, yes, they have a real world perception of the world, right? Yes, you know, Captain America is not oblivious to the way the world works, right? It's not like he's like, the only villains out there are people who are just like robbing banks, you know, and like whatever villains we're facing for the week. Like Captain America is aware of the fact that there's like muggings and robberies that happen every day. But the overall gist behind a lot of these characters is they're out there in like the big world fighting the big fights, right? So like you don't really see stories where like Captain America is fighting some mugger who is like attacking some old woman. You don't really see that. And it really kind of ties into the nature of Kwannon because when she looks at the character of Betsy Braddock, is this is a girl with her head in the clouds, right? This is a girl out there doing whatever superhero thing she's doing, but she's not really connected to the real world. She doesn't really know how dark this world could be. And so it's almost one of these things where Kwannon's kind of trying to become this kind of anti-hero slash hero, almost kind of like this Wolverine-esque Punisher type character. We're not 100% sure yet, but it's cool, right? To see the world for what it really is, as opposed to how people would like it to be, is a very important thing because what it does is it allows you to see the reality of the situation as opposed to walking around with rose-colored glasses. And so the result of this is that, of course, her basically teaming up with Cable and with X-23 going out to help save this village. As soon as they get out there, the village is basically empty, and they're met with like this giant machine, basically, you know, this thing that initially goes to attack them, and then of course the story basically cuts off there. But for those of you guys who watched the first video, I want to know what you guys think about this story so far, right? Or who read the first issue. I want to know what you all think about like issue number 2 versus issue number 1, because I definitely think it gets a whole lot interesting. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. We've got some new patrons in our top tiers over on patreon.com/comicsexplained. I want to give a shout out to Jason C, Austin S, Jason S, Austin H, Philip, and Austin B, as well as Steven Z, Eagle F, Joey M, and Jeff R, as well as Genosis 916. As always, we just usually keep the last name to an initial. It helps you guys to maintain your anonymity. Some of you guys have expressed concern about having like your first and last name thrown out there for the world to see. I do not blame you. For you guys who have joined up as part of our Patreon tiers that are eligible for Rob Corps Honor Guard rings, those whose rings have been sent out, you should already have them. If you're a new person who just joined up and you've been part of this tier for a month, your ring will be mailed out to you. So I want to say thank you guys for being patrons.